So I remember I have the South Indian postmate who got commissioned into the Sikh infantry. He learned Punjabi and could read the Guru Granth Sahib.
Has that been the case that a lot of women are now trying to join the military or the Navy especially, or do you think, that there's not?
The number is increasing. In fact, the National Defence Academy also now caters for girl cadets. A man in uniform knows the cost of war. And that person would be the first person who would want to avoid a conflict. But if it is forced, then we do our job. The cost of war is high. And so we are the first people who would say, don't fight, let's try to achieve some peaceful means. So it is said that the seas are font of all life. 75% of this planet is water.
Yes.
Yet we name it Earth.
Yes.
That's the first point.
Hi everyone, welcome to No Idea Whatsoever. I have Captain Parmar with me today. He was serving in the Indian Navy for 40 years. In this episode, we are going to talk about the career opportunities the seas bring to us, as well as maritime security. Good afternoon, Captain. Welcome to No Idea Whatsoever.
Thank you, Devki. It's an honor to be here.
I'm so glad you could make it. And this is actually a very interesting topic. Yet, I tried to do all the reading I could, but please pardon me in case I forget things or I don't know the terminologies and the technicalities of this profession, because unfortunately, there's just not much, I've studied about it. So please forgive me if I make a mistake.
No problems. I'll try to guide you along the way.
Thank you. So, my first question to everybody is actually, did you know what you were going to do when you grew up, or did you have no idea whatsoever?
I think I had an iota of an idea what I wanted to do. And joining the military was, I would say, part of my DNA. And my family's history with the military goes back to my grandfather's grandfather.
Okay, wow.
My great-grandfather fought in World War I.
Wow.
My grandfather wore a uniform in World War II. He was a teacher. And then my father, unfortunately, couldn't join for medical reasons, but his younger brother and many of my uncles and other relatives have been in the services. Somewhere along the path, I think the color white attracted me.
Okay.
And that's because I think I lived in England for 3 years as a child, where the Royal Navy was the senior service. I think that's when the bug bit me. And somewhere further down the line, I decided I wanted to fly.
Okay.
So to fly the seas was a passion that finally became a reality.
But were your uncles in the Navy, or most of them your family, or different parts of?
Most were in the army.
Okay.
I had one cousin who was in the Navy, senior to me. He also flew the same aircraft I did. So I'm not sure whether it was because of him, but he got quite a hounding from my uncles who were in the army, who were convinced that he had sort of convinced me to join the Navy and not the army. But I think from around 8 or 9 years old, I was sure that I wanted to join the military.
But was that because your family had a history in it, or if you think your family didn't have a history, being in the army, would you have still gone ahead and done that?
I think there's a lot of issues that come from what your family members do. And having visited my uncles and my aunts when they were in service, it leaves a lasting impression on a young, impressionable mind, especially the sort of facilities that are available, the discipline, the lifestyle. It all adds up. And I think also a part also comes from the type of books you read.
Yes.
And my father had both my parents actually are avid readers. It's a passion my wife and I have. And luckily we've passed it on to our kids. So my father had a good collection of books on military leadership, biographies, autobiographies. So I grew up reading them. So I think that made the stamp more impressionable than me.
And who was one of the leaders that you idolized in this?
Well, I read Montgomery, I read Patton, and of course I read Admiral Cunningham. So it was a mix and match.
Okay. And, obviously you grew up knowing what you wanted to do, which is amazing and rare also for a lot of people. But where did you study, and, which school were you in?
I'll cut the long story short. So I started my first standard in England. My parents were there. And I did from first to third there. And of course, as I said, it's there that, we used to have these commando comics. I don't know if they're still around. And my passion was to buy anything related to the Navy among the commando comics. So that added to the literature. So I did 3 years in England. And then we shifted to Nigeria, did 3 years there. Somewhere along the line, I think my father felt I was losing touch with my culture and who I was. I was quite a confused kid. So he sent me back to India for education.
Okay.
So I did 2 years in Xavier's Jaipur. and they were shutting down the hostel. So I was shifted to Army Public School, Dholakua. And we have lasting friendships. A lot of them are in uniform, have served also. And from 11th, then I joined the National Defense Academy. I was all of 16. And 5 of us from our batch of 84 joined the National Defense Academy. 3 Army, 2 Navy.
Wow. So you studied in England, then Nigeria, then India. How was the education system for you in these 3 countries? Was it very, very different the way you were taught in the other places?
In fact, it was. You heard of cultural shocks. I had educational shocks. So one is when I went to England first. One was the issue of learning the English language. And if I remember correctly, we were in a small place called St. Helens. We were the first Asian family there.
Wow.
So the focus was on English. As a result, I forgot Hindi, Punjabi.
Okay.
Then we went to Nigeria. That sort of trend continued because it follows the British system and O-level, A-levels. The punch came is when I came to Jaipur. So during the entrance exam, I just rattled through the English and maths papers, but Hindi, my mother had to teach me the alphabet again. Vocabulary was an issue, so I could read the question, but I couldn't understand what they were asking. So the school was kind enough to admit me, and there I learned Hindi and Sanskrit. That's a double whammy for me there. So a lot of difference in the methodology of education. That's CBSE, and then that continued with the Army Public School, so there wasn't much of a change there.
And how were the teachers abroad vis-a-vis India?
Well, I was a kid at that point in time, and when you're small, your teachers are akin to gods in a way. The methodology of teaching is different. It's more practical based abroad, I think, as compared to in India, where we have more of a rote system, and I think the percentages tell the whole story.
Sure, I agree completely. Being in the military is something which is really, like you said, it was in your DNA, and that actually makes so much sense because I've only seen people join the military when they have relatives or family members or in the military. Otherwise, it's just not a profession that people want to take up. It's really not, and we don't know if it's even an option. So why do you think that is?
So one aspect is what you say is correct. If you have people in a particular profession, the child automatically gets oriented to that because it forms a part of his everyday talk, what he hears, his interaction experiences. So if you have families who are in the military, I have a lot of friends who are 3rd or 4th generation military officers, not necessarily Army, even Navy also. But then there are some children who join schools like military schools, Sainik schools, the RIMC in Dehradun. So they are automatically being taught in a way to join the military. So these form the core of the people who join military, in a way.
And why do you think people from affluent backgrounds or, kids who are going to schools, international schools, don't think that this is a career option? Is it because, because I think people don't know, they feel like, once you're in the military, you're confined to a certain salary, then you get a pension, there can be no growth perhaps. Is that the case really?
There's a lot of case difference in the money packets, which I will agree with, absolutely. But what people don't realize is the military gives you a lot of adventure and opportunity, and it builds you into character building. So when I joined National Defense Academy and I passed out, I remember the chief guest for a passing out parade was Admiral Tahiliani, former chief of naval staff. And in his speech at the passing out parade, he said, "You send us boys, we turn them into men." So that's something that builds up, and there is a lack of understanding what the military provides. Today, if you look at it at the drop of a hat, it is the military that's called into action.
Yeah.
Because it has the capacity, it has the capability, it has the resilience, it has the training to do so.
Yes.
And in the military, these aspects of society, of whatever little we see today, sort of disappear. The army is very fond of saying that the officers come from everywhere, but when they join a regiment, they follow the religion of their men, the language, the eating habits. So I remember I have the South Indian postmate who got commissioned into the Sikh infantry. He learned Punjabi and could read the Guru Granth Sahib. So that's the way the military works. And this is an aspect which many people don't understand, especially those who focus mainly on the monetary benefits.
Yes.
And if you look at the children of military personnel, you see the confidence with which they easily adjust to so many issues, whatever, give them any environment, give them any condition, they adapt themselves suitably there. So it's a totally different ecosystem and lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's supportive and it provides you ample opportunities to grow. That is something I think the militaries, the PR is on, but it's a hard sell.
Yes. It's also one of those things where it's a very male driven profession, you know. And I now, sometimes when I drive in Delhi, I see, you know, outside the race course that they've put up a billboard to join the Navy. And there's actually a lady, like a girl, who's advertising. And but it's not, has that been the case that a lot of women are now trying to join the military or the Navy, especially? Or do you think, you know, that there's not?
They are. The number is increasing. In fact, the National Defense Academy also now caters for girl cadets.
Okay.
So from basic training.
And when did they start that?
A couple of years ago, but I'm
Okay.
not too sure. But at least I remember in the Navy, the first batch of lady officers came in around 91, 92. Similar with the Army and the Air Force. The number is growing. A lot of them are holding senior positions. Uh, Earlier, there were many doctors, only mainly doctors who came in. But now we're finding them in all walks of life. And I think they take up the challenge admirably.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you know, the one apprehension they could possibly have is that obviously it's such a male-dominated profession. Is the training quite, you know, sex agnostic, where it's both for males and females, or how does the training happen?
Well, I'm not too sure of that, but I can bet my bottom dollar there's not going to be any difference.
Okay.
I'm sure the ladies won't like it if there's a difference being made.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, technically they should be in the same position as their male colleagues as well. So, you know, we obviously talk about the Indian Navy, and I mean, I have always loved stories from the army, and you know, we love war. We have so many movies around war, and those movies are always super hits. Yet, you know, there's that thing of just revering people who have worked and served the nation. But we don't know so much about it in terms of the education. Do you really think that, you know, schools must have a module where we're really learning about the Navy, the Army, the way the military really functions?
I think you have a point there. And there is, to my understanding, a group of people at work at the highest levels trying to inculcate the issue of maritime history into school curriculum, which will make people more aware of our maritime history, our navies down the centuries, what they've done, empires, the Indian Navy, and similarly for the Army and the Air Force. There needs to be an inclusion. So there's a better understanding of what the military does. And let me tell you one thing, you know, it's um, a man in uniform knows the cost of war. And that person would be the first person who would want to avoid a conflict. But if it is forced, then we do our job. The cost of war is high. And so we are the first people who would say, don't fight, let's try to achieve some peaceful means. If we have to fight, then we'll go in.
Yeah. You know, the only time I really read about maritime or the seas and how science and technology worked was when I read about the Chola dynasty, right? They were the pioneers of the seas. So, and yet I think that is where it was left. It wasn't really, and we really innovated so much in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, the importance of the seas?
So it is said that the seas are font of all life. 75% of this planet is water.
Yes.
Yet we name it Earth.
Yes.
That's the first point. And well, the globe can consider changing the name to water than Earth, and therefore you can pursue a more, a more powerful path. So if everything comes from the seas actually give you a lot of stuff. Not only does it give you living, non-living resources, which the world thrives on today, not only has it produced life on land, but it is also a medium of transportation, trade, economics. And to give you an example, 93% of India's dependence is on the maritime domain. All our imports, exports, whether it's oil, whether it's goods, is all across. And when you look at the spread of Indian diaspora, I do this as an annual feature and an annual talk. When you look at the people of Indian origin, we have around 99% of them in coastal states, which proves that in the days of sail, that's where they were taken and settled down. And we have around a closer percentage of NRIs who live in coastal states itself. So this via media of the maritime domain has gained importance over the years. Somewhere in between, it got lost, especially where India was concerned, for multiple reasons. But now the growing interest in the maritime domain, it means a lot. So we are one of the few countries who have got lively continental borders, and we also have active maritime borders. So a lot of essence has to be given on the maritime domain. So we have dividends that come from the maritime domain, we also have threats and challenges that we have to look at.
Yes. So, what are the career options if one were to look at, the maritime domain?
Oh, that's a long list. So, apart from the Indian Navy and the Indian Coast Guard, who are the maritime agencies or arms of India, you have the Merchant Marine, high-paying jobs, but you are out at sea days on end. Your separation from families can run into months. Not an easy life. That's one. Then you have, as far as medicine is concerned, since there are a lot of people like to become doctors, underwater medicine. And if we are putting, say, space travelers for jaunts into space, the time is going to come when we're going to put them in submarines underwater. And a lot of issues are going to be underwater, especially when we start looking at taking out the resources from the bottom of the sea as technology goes. So even the medical arm has a subject on underwater medicine, which can be looked at. That's one. Then, of course, there's a lot on logistics, trade, shipbuilding, design, construction. So there are n number of jobs, and I don't know how many of you remember Jacques Cousteau. At least my generation would know him as an underwater specialist. So there is ample, but in India, there is less focus on all that. That needs to be looked at.
Yeah. And you said submarine, and my ears have just sort of gone up because I think we've seen so many movies around submarines. Have you been in one?
I went in once and I decided I'm not going to become a submarine.
Why is that?
Well, it's.
Because I think all of us want to be in one at some point just to see what it's like.
That's true. That's true. But I couldn't bring myself to being, in a confined space for days on end.
Yeah.
In a submarine. It's a tough life.
Very tough. How long what is the longest someone has spent in a submarine?
I'm not sure if there's a record, but just to tell you, the fact is that nuclear powered submarines' limitation is the endurance of the crew. I think that sort of sums it up. But it's an adventurous life that has its own add-ons.
Like what?
Well, submariners.
Yeah.
And I've been hunting submarines all my life, and they are difficult to find.
I'm sure. That's their purpose.
That's
right?
true, yes.
To not be found.
That's true.
But do you think, even for landlocked nations, or cities rather, like Delhi, etc., why are the seas so important? And tell us a little bit about maritime security. How does that work? There's so many businesses that solely depend on the sea, for example.
That's true.
How do you protect that?
So let's start with landlocked nations. So there's an international convention called the United Convention on the Laws of the Sea. It came into effect, signed in 1982, came into effect 94. So that caters for landlocked nations. It very clearly states that landlocked nations also have a right of access to the sea for trade purposes. But it also provides, for the resources division.
Okay.
So the coastal state has to work out in a methodical fashion, and that fashion is given as to how to work out what is the share of a landlocked nation. And you'll find a lot of landlocked nations are fully aware of their rights because their existence, as far as trade and commerce goes, is by the seas. So they have a better understanding of the importance of the seas than many coastal nations have. And so you spoke about Delhi. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a factory in Delhi and you are manufacturing stuff, but you import the raw material. Quantity-wise, it's huge. Where does it come from? By the sea. You produce something, you export it. Quantity-wise, large again. How does it go out? By the sea. So any landlocked city or any landlocked nation is therefore dependent on the seas for their survival, existence, essentially, commerce and trade. And if you read the constitution or preamble of any nation, it always looks at the prosperity and well-being of its people. In that area, the maritime domain or the environment plays a major role. So when you talk about security, there are two aspects to maritime. People generally tend to get confused. One is security and one is safety.
Okay.
So let's talk about safety first. So safety is the safety of the ships that traverse the seas. They should be shipworthy. They have to be certified, clear. And then, of course, is the safety of the men who sail on there. So like we have traffic rules, the seas have also got rules. And this is an internationally accepted convention. It's called the Avoidance of Collisions at Sea. We call it rules of the road. So there are certain specific rules that are given that all shipping follows, whether it's merchant marine or naval. But so that's part of the safety and of the safety factor. Security comes in many aspects. One is that you are making your own nation secure from threats that come from the sea. Certain examples are piracy, terrorism, smuggling, whether it is. You'll be surprised that the smuggling of exotic animals and plants is an ecosystem unto itself, but we're not aware of it because it's really talked about. We look more on arms, drugs, people, that sort of. So these are the sorts of threats and challenges that security looks at. So when you look at security, again, there are two types. One is traditional, one is non-traditional. So traditional is state on state. You are at conflict with another nation. That comes under the traditional security factor. Non-traditional security is anything which is non-state. What I mentioned, piracy, terrorism, smuggling, and all that. And if you've been reading the news, we realize that the Red Sea is a highly vulnerable area. There is instability. And any instability on land always has an impact on the sea.
Absolutely.
And it spreads. And since we have a huge coastline and a huge maritime domain, India generally gets affected in this region the most, where instability is concerned. So therefore, you have to look at the security of not only of your commerce and trade, but also of the nation, protect the sovereignty. It's very difficult to describe.
Yeah.
So I always say that let's not try to define maritime security, work around it as a concept. You'll find your answers therein.
Because, there's always wars fought to grab land and to acquire land. But how does it work in the seas? Like India is until a certain point in the Indian Ocean and then suddenly it moves into another country. Like how do you define that? Because I know you only have X nautical miles before you're in a different...
You've done your reading, you've done your reading.
You're in a different nation and, when you're flying or you're taking the train or any sort of means, you have a visa and a passport and back in the day, the only means was, the ships that people would go sail months in order to reach from India to England and so on and so forth. So how does this geography function?
So when the United Nations for Convention on the Law of the Seas of 1982, by the way, there were two UNCLOSes before that, 58 and 60, which have carried forward. The second one wasn't successful due to the Cold War. First one came out with a lot of methodology that nations were to follow when looking at the maritime domain. And one of the main reasons of the UNCLOS 1982 was to prevent land grab at sea by developed nations. That was one of the rationales given that we need to relook at the rules and regulations of the conventions of the sea. And therefore, this came out with a number of maritime zones. So the baseline is where we start from. I will not get into technicalities, but it is the line closest to your coast based on certain definitions from which you measure outwards. So the first seaward of the baseline is your territorial sea. That can extend up to 12 nautical miles, roughly 24 kilometers. So in that, the sovereignty of the coastal nation is sacrosanct. Laws of the land will apply. Then 24 miles from the baseline is your contiguous zone. Then comes the exclusive economic zone. And now we also have the continental shelf, which is coming. So this extends up to 200. So up to 200 nautical miles or less, you have some sort of national jurisdiction under the coastal states, where there are certain rights, privileges, duties of both the coastal state and the other states who traverse those seas. So it's a very interesting document to read, but it clearly lays out the mandate of nations, how to utilize and it's also called the Constitution of the Seas, by the way. So that's one way of looking at it out there. And a lot of nations have not signed or ratified. Some nations have signed but not ratified. So you have various nations who are in various states of agreement or disagreement as far as this convention is concerned. So the moment you depart your territorial seas, and this is where the navies have to be more careful, you are operating in an international environment.
Correct.
So you need to know the rules, you need to know the laws, you need to know the conventions, you need to know the do's and don'ts. How would you do it? So let's say you asked about a visa. So this a visa is obviously shown when you hit land and enter a port. But if you ask me, the visa requirement would start the moment you enter the territorial seas of another nation, provided you are going to go on land of that nation. If you're just transiting through, then you don't need a visa. So the maritime domain is quite complex.
Yeah, it's a very gray area in the sense to us, where we've never really read about it. We really don't know what the technicalities are. Another interesting thing I read was, that a princess from Ayodhya in 48 AD traveled 4,500 kilometers to Korea and married the king, and then she became the queen of Korea. How did that happen?
So that's connectivity for you. And it's not that we haven't been connected. You mentioned the Cholas initially,
Yes.
remember. So when you look at the maritime history of India and you see the impact we have left in most Southeast Asian nations, the names are similar, symbols are similar. Garud is a very revered symbol.
Yes.
The design of temples, a lot of dances, the dresses, which indicates that there was hectic and busy interaction between nations eastward of India up to Korea, as you mentioned once. So that was the reach. And even in the West, we had it all the way up to even Rome.
Yeah.
And even along the east coast of Africa. And then, of course, the maritime medium also provided the passage of Western nations and colonization, which is another part of history.
Yeah. So, one thing that you had mentioned to me when we were speaking was that one of the modules that you were teaching, was public speaking.
True.
Why public speaking? Such an interesting thing that we don't even learn in school, but suddenly now you have to train people. What is the importance of that?
I believe that if you are able to convey your message in brief but clearly and unravel the complexities of an issue in a very simplistic way, you would know your public speaking way. The ability to say so much in so less time in a clear way is the importance of public speaking. So it's all a question of putting a narrative out there. And you're right, I think school should also concentrate. That's why you have debate sessions in school. It's a way of public speaking. And although this is a module which is taught in staff college, we have a staff college in Wellington, near Ooty, and there it's taught. And it's not that it's the first time that military officers have an exposure to public speaking. They have it all along since cadet days upwards to younger officers' days and continues till the end. And my experience says that there are two types of people in the world. One is who are natural orators and have stage presence.
Yes.
The best example I can give you is Churchill.
Yes.
Is one. The other is people who are shy and they have certain amount of stage fright. But it's not something that can't be overcome. It can be overcome, and you just need to practice and practice and practice. Now that I'm in the business of writing, I can write a paper. I don't know how many people will read it. But if I'm participating in an event and I'm presenting my views or my subject, I know the outreach would be instantaneous but short-lived. So then the writing takes over after that. So public speaking is of importance that we need to convey maximum people at a certain point in time to get that necessary impact. And that's something we should focus on. And it's not necessary that you should speak in English.
Absolutely.
You can speak in any language you want.
Yes.
And it's more important because I do remember at one stage when we were looking at media for a certain reason also, we always forget that the vernacular media in any country has more outreach than the English-speaking.
Sure. So when you're recruiting, what are the skills you look for in an amazing candidate that you want to hire?
Well, if you are looking at recruitment to the Navy, I've not been in that process, but a lot of my friends have been. So we are looking at a person who is malleable, who's receptive, who's flexible, is keen to learn, and does not necessarily have to have a high order of intelligence who asks too many questions. So they sometimes seem to be a misfit. So generally, this is the traits that we look at people. Public speaking, again, when we do this services selection board, it's one of the exercises we do. Not that it goes against a person that much unless the person is totally young. In that context, one more aspect comes to mind is knowledge. If you are speaking on something, you better have enough knowledge, because I have faced many a times a googly that comes your way that you're not prepared for.
Yes.
And that's only experience can, get you out of that sticky situation.
Yeah.
So that's part of the game.
Great. So, I mean, I'm just so overwhelmed hearing all this, but it was so interesting, and I hope that a lot of people are going to learn from this and also choose a career option which is outside of the mainstream, career options that we have. So, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.